The Secret Teachings of All Ages by ManlyPHall. Part 7, BACCHIC RITES, Atlantis, Dying God. Enjoy the listening. A manuscript by Thomas Taylor contains the following remarkable paragraph. Plato was initiated into the greater mysteries at the age of 49. The initiation took place in one of the subterranean halls of the Great Pyramid in Egypt. The Dionysiac table formed the altar, before which the divine Plato stood and received that which was always his, but which the ceremony of the mysteries enkindled and brought from its dormant state. With this ascent, after 3 days in the Great Hall, he was received by the Hierophant of the pyramid. The Hierophant was seen only by those who had passed the 3 days, the 3 degrees, the 3 dimensions, and given verbally the highest esoteric teachings, each accompanied with its appropriate symbol. After a further 3 months' sojourn in the halls of the pyramid, the initiate Plato was sent out into the world to do the work of the Great Order, as Pythagoras and Orpheus had been before him. Before the sacking of Rome in 1527, there is no historical mention of the Mensa Isiaca, the tablet of Isis. At that time, the tablet came into the possession of a certain locksmith or ironworker, who sold it at an exorbitant price to Cardinal Bembo, a celebrated antiquary, historiographer of the Republic of Venice, and afterwards librarian of St. Mark's. After his death in 1547, the Isiac tablet was acquired by the House of Mantua, in whose museum it remained until 1630, when troops of Ferdinand II captured the city of Mantua. Several early writers on the subject have assumed that the tablet was demolished by the ignorant soldiery for the silver it contained. The assumption, however, was erroneous. The tablet fell into the hands of Cardinal Pava, who presented it to the Duke of Savoy, who in turn presented it to the King of Sardinia. When the French conquered Italy in 1797, the tablet was carried to Paris. In 1809, Alexander Lenoir, writing of the Mensa Isiaca, said it was on exhibition at the Bibliothèque Nationale. Upon the establishment of peace between the two countries, it was returned to Italy. In his guide to northern Italy, Carl Baedeker describes the Mensa Isiaca as being in the center of Gallery 2 in the Museum of Antiquities at Turin. A faithful reproduction of the original tablet was made in 1559 by the celebrated Aeneas Vicus of Parma, and a copy of the engraving was given by the Chancellor of the Duke of Bavaria to the Museum of Hieroglyphics. Athanasius Kircher describes the tablet as 5 palms long and 4 wide. W. Wynne Westcott says it measures 50 by 30 inches. It was made of bronze and decorated with encaustic or smalt enamel and silver inlay. Fosbroke adds, the figures are cut very shallow, and the contour of most of them is encircled by threads of silver. The bases upon which the figures were seated or reclined and left blank in the prints were of silver and are torn away. Those familiar with the fundamental principles of Hermetic philosophy will recognize in the Mensa Isiaca the key to Chaldean, Egyptian, and Greek theology. In his Antiquities, the learned Benedictine, Father Montfaucon, admits his inability to cope with the intricacies of its symbolism. He therefore doubts that the emblems upon the tablet possess any significance worthy of consideration and ridicules Kircher, declaring him to be more obscure than the tablet itself. Laurentius Pignorius reproduced the tablet in connection with a descriptive essay in 1605, but his timidly advanced explanations demonstrated his ignorance concerning the actual interpretation of the figures. In his Oedipus Aegyptiacus, published in 1654, Kircher attacked the problem with characteristic avidity. Being peculiarly qualified for such a task by years of research in matters pertaining to the secret doctrines of antiquity, and with the assistance of a group of eminent scholars, Kircher accomplished much towards an exposition of the mysteries of the tablet. The master secret, however, eluded even him, as Eliphas Levi has shrewdly noted in his History of Magic. The learned Jesuit, writes Levi, divined that it contained the hieroglyphic key to sacred alphabets, though he was unable to develop the explanation. It is divided into 3 equal compartments. Above are the 12 houses of heaven, and below are the corresponding distributions of labor throughout the year, while in the middle place are 21 sacred signs answering to the letters of the alphabet. In the midst of all is a seated figure of the pantomorphic IYNX, emblem of universal being and corresponding as such to the Hebrew Yod, or to that unique letter from which all the other letters were formed. The IYNX is encircled by the Ophite triad, answering to the three mother letters of the Egyptian and Hebrew alphabets. On the right are the Ibomorphic and Serapion triads. On the left are those of Nephthys and Hecate, representing active and passive, fixed and volatile, fructifying fire and generating water. Each pair of triads in conjunction with the center produces a septenary, and a septenary is contained in the center. The three septenaries furnish the absolute number of the three worlds, as well as the complete number of primitive letters, to which a complementary sign is added, like 0 to the 9 numerals. Levi's hint may be construed to mean that the 21 figures in the center section of the table represent the 21 major trumps of the tarot cards. If this be so, is not the 0 card, cause of so much controversy, the nameless crown of the supreme mind, the crown being symbolized by the hidden triad in the upper part of the throne in the center of the table? Might not the first emanation of this supreme mind be well symbolized by a juggler or magician with the symbols of the four lower worlds spread out on a table before him: the rod, the sword, the cup, and the coin? Thus considered, the 0 card belongs nowhere among the others, but is in fact the fourth dimensional point from which they all emanated, and consequently is broken up into the 21 cards, letters, which, when gathered together, produce the 0. The cipher appearing upon this card would substantiate this interpretation. For the cipher, or circle, is emblematic of the superior sphere, from which issue the lower worlds, powers, and letters. Westcott carefully collected the all too meager theories advanced by various authorities, and in 1887 published his now extremely rare volume, which contains the only detailed description of the Isiac tablet published in English since Humphreys translated Montfaucon's worthless description in 1721. After explaining his reticence to reveal that which Levi evidently felt was better left concealed, Westcott sums up his interpretation of the tablet as follows. The diagram of Levi, by which he explains the mystery of the tablet, shows the upper region divided into the 4 seasons of the year, each with 3 signs of the zodiac, and he has added the 4-lettered sacred name, the tetragrammaton, assigning Jod to Aquarius, that is Canopus, he to Taurus, that is Apis, Vow to Leo, that is Momphtha, and he final to Typhon. Note the cherubic parallel, man, bull, lion, and eagle. The 4th form is found either as scorpion or eagle depending upon the occult good or evil intention. In the demotic zodiac, the snake replaces the scorpion. The lower region he ascribes to the 12 simple Hebrew letters, associating them with the 4 quarters of the horizon. The central region he ascribes to the solar powers and the planetary. In the middle we see above, the sun, marked Ops, and below it is a Solomon's seal, above a cross. A double triangle hexapla, 1 light and 1 dark triangle superposed, the whole forming a sort of complex symbol of Venus. To the Ibomorphos he gives the 3 dark planets, Venus, Mercury, and Mars placed around a dark triangle erect, denoting fire. To the Nephthyian triad he gives 3 light planets, Saturn, Luna, and Jupiter, around a light inverted triangle which denotes water. There is a necessary connection between water, female power, passive principle, Binah, and Sephirotic mother and bride. Note the ancient signs for the planets were all composed of a cross, solar disk, and crescent. Venus is a cross below a sun disk. Mercury, a disk with a crescent above and cross below. Saturn is a cross whose lowest point touches the apex of the crescent. Jupiter is a crescent whose lowest point touches the left-hand end of a cross. All these are deep mysteries. Note that Levi in his original plate transposed Serapis and Hecate, but not the Apis noir and Apis blanc, perhaps because of the head of Bes being associated by him with Hecate. Note that having referred the 12 simple letters to the lower, the 7 double must correspond to the central region of the planets, and then the great triad AMS, the mother letters representing air, water, and fire, remain to be pictured, around S the central inks, or Yod, by the Ophionian triad the 2 serpents and the Leonine sphinx. Levi's word ops in the center is the Latin ops, terra, genius of the earth. And the Greek ops, Rhea or Cybele Cybele, often drawn as a goddess seated in a chariot drawn by lions. She is crowned with turrets and holds a key. The essay published in French by Alexander Lenoir in 1809, while curious and original, contains little real information on the tablet, which the author seeks to prove was an Egyptian calendar or astrological chart. As both Montfaucon and Lenoir, In fact, all writers on the subject since 1651 either have based their work upon that of Kircher or have been influenced considerably by him. A careful translation has been made of the latter's original article, 80 pages of 17th century Latin. The double-page plate at the beginning of this chapter is a faithful reproduction made by Kircher from the engraving in the Museum of Hieroglyphics. The small letters and numbers used to designate the figures were added by him to clarify his commentary and will be used for the same purpose in this work. Like nearly all religious and philosophical antiquities, the BEMBINE table of Isis has been the subject of much controversy. In a footnote, A.E. Waite, unable to differentiate between the true and the purported nature or origin of the tablet, echoes the sentiments of J.G. Wilkinson, another eminent exotericist. The original table is exceedingly late and is roughly termed a forgery. On the other hand, Eduard Winkelmann, a man of profound learning, defends the genuineness and antiquity of the tablet. A sincere consideration of the Mensa Isiaca discloses one fact of paramount importance: that although whoever fashioned the table was not necessarily an Egyptian, he was an initiate of the highest order, conversant with the most arcane tenets of Hermetic esotericism. It was a common practice among the early Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans to seal lighted lamps in the sepulchres of their dead as offerings to the god of death. Possibly it was also believed that the deceased could use these lights in finding his way through the valley of the shadow. Later, as the custom became generally established, not only actual lamps, but miniatures of them in terracotta were buried with the dead. Some of the lamps were enclosed in circular vessels for protection. And instances have been recorded in which the original oil was found in them, in a perfect state of preservation, after more than 2,000 years. There is ample proof that many of these lamps were burning when the sepulchres were sealed, and it has been declared that they were still burning when the vaults were opened hundreds of years later. The possibility of preparing a fuel which would renew itself as rapidly as it was consumed has been a source of considerable controversy among medieval authors. After due consideration of the evidence at hand, it seems well within the range of possibility that the ancient priest-chemists did manufacture lamps that burned, if not indefinitely, at least for considerable periods of time. Numerous authorities have written on the subject of ever-burning lamps. W. Wynne Westcott estimates the number of writers who have given the subject consideration as more than 150, and H. P. Blavatsky as 173. While conclusions reached by different authors are at variance, a majority admit the existence of these phenomenal lamps. Only a few maintained that the lamps would burn forever, but many were willing to concede that they might remain alight for several centuries without replenishment of the fuel. Some considered the so-called perpetual lights as mere artifices of the crafty pagan priests, while a great many, admitting that the lamps actually burned, made the sweeping assertion that the devil was using this apparent miracle to ensnare the credulous and thereby lead their souls to perdition. On this subject, the learned Jesuit Athanasius Kircher, usually dependable, exhibits a striking inconsistency. In his Oedipus Egyptiacus he writes, "Not a few of these ever-burning lamps have been found to be the devices of devils. And I take it that all the lamps found in the tombs of the Gentiles dedicated to the worship of certain gods were of this kind, not because they burned, or have been reported to burn with a perpetual flame, but because probably the devil set them there, maliciously intending thereby to obtain fresh credence for a false worship." Having admitted that dependable authorities defend the existence of the ever-burning lamps, and that even the devil lends himself to their manufacture, Kircher next declared the entire theory to be desperate and impossible, and to be classed with perpetual motion and the philosopher's stone. Having already solved the problem to his satisfaction once, Kircher solves it again, but differently, in the following words. In Egypt there are rich deposits of asphalt and petroleum. What did these clever fellows, the priests, do then, but connect an oil deposit by a secret duct with one or more lamps, provided with wicks of asbestos? How could such lamps help burning perpetually? In my opinion, this is the solution of the riddle of the supernatural everlastingness of these ancient lamps. Montfaucon, in his Antiquities, agrees in the main with the later deductions of Kircher, believing the fabled perpetual lamps of the temples to be cunning mechanical contrivances. He further adds that the belief that lamps burned indefinitely in tombs was the result of the noteworthy fact that in some cases fumes resembling smoke poured forth from the entrances of newly opened vaults. Parties going in later and discovering lamps scattered about the floor assumed that they were the source of the fumes. There are several interesting stories concerning the discoveries of ever-burning lamps in various parts of the world. In a tomb on the Appian Way, which was opened during the papacy of Paul III, was found a burning lamp, which had remained alight in a hermetically sealed vault for nearly 1,600 years. According to an account written by a contemporary, a body, that of a young and beautiful girl with long golden hair, was found floating in an unknown transparent liquid, and as well preserved as though death had occurred but a few hours before. About the interior of the vault were a number of significant objects, which included several lamps, one of them alight. Those entering the sepulchre declared that the draft caused by the opening of the door blew out the light, and the lamp could not be relighted. Kircher reproduces an epitaph, Tully Ali Filii Me, supposedly found in the tomb, but which Montfaucon declares never existed, the latter adding that although conclusive evidence was not found, the body was generally believed to be that of Tulliola, the daughter of Cicero. Ever-burning lamps have been discovered in all parts of the world. Not only the Mediterranean countries, but also India, Tibet, China, and South America have contributed records of lights which burned continuously without fuel. The examples which follow were selected at random from the imposing list of perpetual lamps found in different ages. Plutarch wrote of a lamp that burned over the door of a temple to Jupiter Ammon. The priests declared that it had remained alight for centuries without fuel. St. Augustine described a perpetual lamp, guarded in a temple in Egypt sacred to Venus, which neither wind nor water could extinguish. He believed it to be the work of the devil. An ever-burning lamp was found at Edessa, or Antioch, during the reign of the Emperor Justinian. It was in a niche over the city gate, elaborately enclosed to protect it from the elements. The date upon it proved that the lamp had been burning for more than 500 years. It was destroyed by soldiers. During the early Middle Ages, a lamp was found in England which had burned since the 3rd century after Christ. The monument containing it was believed to be the tomb of the father of Constantine the Great. The Lantern of Pallas was discovered near Rome in AD 1401. It was found in the sepulchre of Pallas, son of Evander, immortalized by Virgil in his Aeneid. The lamp was placed at the head of the body and had burned with a steady glow for more than 2,000 years. In AD 1550 on the island of Nessus, in the Bay of Naples, a magnificent marble vault was opened in which was found a lamp still alight, which had been placed there before the beginning of the Christian era. Pausanias described a beautiful golden lamp in the Temple of Minerva, which burned steadily for a year without refueling or having the wick trimmed. The ceremony of filling the lamp took place annually, and time was measured by the ceremony. According to the Fama Fraternitatis, the crypt of Christian Rosicrucian, when opened 120 years after his death, was found to be brilliantly illuminated by a perpetual lamp suspended from the ceiling. Numa Pompilius, king of Rome and magician of considerable power, caused a perpetual light to burn in the dome of a temple he had created in honor of an elemental being. In England, a curious tomb was found containing an automaton which moved when certain stones in the floor of the vault were stepped upon by an intruder. At that time, the Rosicrucian controversy was at its height, so it was decided that the tomb was that of a Rosicrucian initiate. A countryman, discovering the tomb and entering, found the interior brilliantly lighted by a lamp hanging from the ceiling. As he walked, his weight depressed some of the floor stones. At once a seated figure in heavy armor began to move. Mechanically, it rose to its feet and struck the lamp with an iron baton, completely destroying it, and thus effectually preventing the discovery of the secret substance which maintained the flame. How long the lamp had burned is unknown, but certainly it had been for a considerable number of years. It is related that among the tombs near Memphis and in the Brahmin temples of India lights have been found in sealed chambers and vessels, but sudden exposure to the air has extinguished them and caused their fuel to evaporate. It is now believed that the wicks of these perpetual lamps were made of braided or woven asbestos, called by the alchemists salamander's wool, and that the fuel was one of the products of alchemical research. Kircher attempted to extract oil from asbestos, being convinced that as the substance itself was indestructible, by fire and oil extracted from it would supply the lamp with a fuel likewise indestructible. After spending 2 years in fruitless experimental work, he concluded that the task was impossible of accomplishment. Several formulae for the making of the fuel for the lamps have been preserved. In Isis Unveiled, H.P. Blavatsky reprints 2 of these formulae from early authors, Tritenheim and Bartolomeo Korndorff. One will suffice to give a general understanding of the process. Sulfur, alum ust, a Roman 4, sublime them into flowers to idge, of which add of crystalline Venetian borax, powdered, J upon these effuse high rectified spirit of wine and digest it, then abstract it and pour on fresh. Repeat this so often till the sulfur melts like wax without any smoke, upon a hot plate of brass. This is for the pabulum, but the wick is to be prepared after this manner. Gather the threads or thrums of the lapis asbestos to the thickness of your middle and the length of your little finger, then put them into a Venetian glass, and covering them over with the aforesaid depurated sulfur or aliment, set the glass in sand for the space of 24 hours, so hot that the sulfur may bubble all the while. The wick being thus besmeared and anointed is to be put into a glass like a scallop shell, in such manner that some part of it may lie above the mass of prepared sulfur. Then setting this glass upon hot sand, you must melt the sulfur, so that it may lay hold of the wick, and when it is lighted, it will burn with a perpetual flame, and you may set this lamp in any place where you please. The worship of Apollo included the establishment and maintenance of places of prophecy, by means of which the gods could communicate with mankind and reveal futurity to such as deserved the boon. The early history of Greece abounds with accounts of talking trees, rivers, statues, and caves in which nymphs, dryads, or demons had taken up their abodes, and from which they delivered oracles. While Christian authors have tried to prove that oracular revelations were delivered by the devil for the purpose of misleading humanity, they have not dared to attack the theory of oracles, because of the repeated reference to it in their own sacred writings. If the onyx stones on the shoulders of Israel's high priest made known by their flashings the will of Jehovah, then a black dove, temporarily endowed with the faculty of speech, could indeed pronounce oracles in the temple of Jupiter Ammon. If the witch of Endor could invoke the shade of Samuel, who in turn gave prophecies to Saul, could not a priestess of Apollo call up the specter of her liege to foretell the destiny of Greece? The most famous oracles of antiquity were those of Delphi, Dodona, Trophonius, and Latona, of which the talking oak trees of Dodona were the oldest. Though it is impossible to trace back to the genesis of the theory of oracular prophecy, it is known that many of the caves and fissures set aside by the Greeks as oracles were sacred long before the rise of Greek culture. The oracle of Apollo at Delphi remains one of the unsolved mysteries of the ancients. Alexander Wilder derives the name Delphi from Delphos, the womb. This name was chosen by the Greeks because of the shape of the cavern and the vent leading into the depths of the earth. The original name of the oracle was Pytho, so called because its chambers had been the abode of the great serpent Python, a fearsome creature that had crept out of the slime left by the receding flood that had destroyed all human beings except Deucalion and Pyrrha. Apollo, climbing the side of Mount Parnassus, slew the serpent after a prolonged combat and threw the body down the fissure of the oracle. From that time the sun god, surnamed the Pythian Apollo, gave oracles from the vent. With Dionysos he shared the honor of being the patron god of Delphi. After being vanquished by Apollo, the spirit of Python remained at Delphi as the representative of his conqueror, and it was with the aid of his effluvium that the priestess was able to become en rapport with the god. The fumes rising from the fissure of the oracle were supposed to come from the decaying body of Python. The name Pythoness, or Pythia, given to the female hierophant of the oracle, means literally one who has been thrown into a religious frenzy by inhaling fumes rising from decomposing matter. It is of further interest to note that the Greeks believed the oracle of Delphi to be the umbilicus of the earth, thus proving that they considered the planet an immense human being. The connection between the principle of oracular revelation and the occult significance of the navel is an important secret belonging to the ancient mysteries. The oracle, however, is much older than the foregoing account indicates. A story of this kind was probably invented by the priests to explain the phenomena to those inquisitive persons whom they did not consider worthy of enlightenment regarding the true esoteric nature of the oracle. Some believe that the Delphic fissure was discovered by a Hyperborean priest, but as far back as recorded history goes, the cave was sacred, and persons came from all parts of Greece and the surrounding countries to question the demon who dwelt in its chimney-like vent. Priests and priestesses guarded it closely and served the spirit who dwelt therein and who enlightened humanity through the gift of prophecy. The story of the original discovery of the oracle is somewhat as follows. Shepherds tending their flocks on the side of Mount Parnassus were amazed at the peculiar antics of goats that wandered close to a great chasm on its southwestern spur. The animals jumped about as though trying to dance, and emitted strange cries unlike anything before heard. At last, one of the shepherds, curious to learn the cause of the phenomenon, approached the vent, from which were rising noxious fumes. Immediately he was seized with a prophetic ecstasy. He danced with wild abandon, sang, jabbered inarticulate sounds, and foretold future events. Others went close to the fissure with the same result. The fame of the place spread, and many came to learn of the future by inhaling the mephitic fumes, which exhilarated to the verge of delirium. Some of those who came, being unable to control themselves and having temporarily the strength of madmen, tore themselves from those seeking to restrain them, and, jumping into the vent, perished. In order to prevent others from doing likewise, a wall was erected around the fissure, and a prophetess was appointed to act as mediator between the oracle and those who came to question it. According to later authorities, a tripod of gold, ornamented with carvings of Apollo in the form of Python, the great serpent, was placed over the cleft, and on this was arranged a specially prepared seat, so constructed that a person would have difficulty in falling off while under the influence of the oracular fumes. Just before this time, a story had been circulated that the fumes of the oracle arose from the decaying body of Python. It is possible that the oracle revealed its own origin. For many centuries during its early history, virgin maidens were consecrated to the service of the oracle. They were called the Phoebades, or Pythii, and constituted that famous order now known as the Pythian priesthood. It is probable that women were chosen to receive the oracles because their sensitive and emotional nature responded more quickly and completely to the fumes of enthusiasm. 3 days before the time set to receive the communications from Apollo, the virgin priestess began the ceremony of purification. She bathed in the Castalian well, abstained from all food, drank only from the fountain of Cassotes, which was brought into the temple through concealed pipes, and just before mounting the tripod, she chewed a few leaves of the sacred bay tree. It has been said that the water was drugged to bring on distorted visions, or the priests of Delphi were able to manufacture an exhilarating and intoxicating gas, which they conducted by subterranean ducts and released into the shaft of the oracle several feet below the surface. Neither of these theories has been proved, however, nor does either in any way explain the accuracy of the predictions. When the young prophetess had completed the process of purification, she was clothed in sanctified raiment and led to the tripod, upon which she seated herself, surrounded by the noxious vapors rising from the yawning fissure. Gradually, as she inhaled the fumes, a change came over her. It was as if a different spirit had entered her body. She struggled, tore her clothing, and uttered inarticulate cries. After a time, her struggles ceased. Upon becoming calm, a great majesty seemed to possess her, and with eyes fixed on space and body rigid, she uttered the prophetic words. The predictions were usually in the form of hexameter verse, but the words were often ambiguous and sometimes unintelligible. Every sound that she made, every motion of her body, was carefully recorded by the 5 Hosii, or holy men, who were appointed as scribes to preserve the minutest details of each divination. The Hosii were appointed for life and were chosen from the direct descendants of Deucalion. After the oracle was delivered, the Pythia began to struggle again, and the spirit released her. She was then carried or supported to a chamber of rest, where she remained till the nervous ecstasy had passed away. Iamblichus, in his dissertation on the mysteries, describes how the spirit of the oracle, a fiery demon, even Apollo himself, took control of the Pythoness and manifested through her. But the prophetess in Delphi, whether she gives oracles to mankind through an attenuated and fiery spirit, bursting from the mouth of the cavern, or whether being seated in the adytum on a brazen tripod, or on a stool with 4 feet, she becomes sacred to the god. Whichsoever of these is the case, she entirely gives herself up to a divine spirit, and is illuminated with a ray of divine fire. And when, indeed, fire ascending from the mouth of the cavern circularly invests her in collected abundance, she becomes filled from it with a divine splendor. But when she places herself on the seat of the god, she becomes co-adapted to his stable prophetic power. And from both of these preparatory operations, she becomes wholly possessed by the god. And then, indeed, he is present with and illuminates her in a separate manner, and is different from the fire, the spirit, the proper seat, and, in short, from all the visible apparatus of the place, whether physical or sacred. Among the celebrities who visited the Oracle of Delphi were the immortal Apollonius of Tyana and his disciple Damis. He made his offerings, and after being crowned with a laurel wreath and given a branch of the same plant to carry in his hand, he passed behind the statue of Apollo, which stood before the entrance to the cave, and descended into the sacred place of the oracle. The priestess was also crowned with laurel and her head bound with a band of white wool. Apollonius asked the oracle if his name would be remembered by future generations. The Pythoness answered in the affirmative, but declared that it would always be calumniated. Apollonius left the cavern in anger, but time has proved the accuracy of the prediction, for the early church fathers perpetuated the name of Apollonius as the Antichrist. The messages given by the virgin prophetess were turned over to the philosophers of the oracle, whose duty it was to interpret and apply them. The communications were then delivered to the poets, who immediately translated them into odes and lyrics, setting forth in exquisite form the statements supposedly made by Apollo and making them available for the populace. Serpents were much in evidence at the Oracle of Delphi. The base of the tripod upon which the Pythia sat was formed of the twisted bodies of 3 gigantic snakes. According to some authorities, one of the processes used to produce the prophetic ecstasy was to force the young priestess to gaze into the eyes of a serpent. Fascinated and hypnotized, she then spoke with the voice of the god. Although the early Pythian priestesses were always maidens, some still in their teens, a law was later enacted that only women past 50 years of age should be the mouthpiece of the oracle. These older women dressed as young girls and went through the same ceremonial as the first Pythia. The change was probably the indirect result of a series of assaults made upon the persons of the priestesses by the profane. During the early history of the Delphian oracle, the god spoke only at each 7th birthday of Apollo. As time went on, however, the demand became so great that the Pythia was forced to seat herself upon the tripod every month. The times selected for the consultation and the questions to be asked were determined by lot or by vote of the inhabitants of Delphi. It is generally admitted that the effect of the Delphian oracle upon Greek culture was profoundly constructive. James Gardner sums up its influence in the following words: "Its responses revealed many a tyrant and foretold his fate. Through its means, many an unhappy being was saved from destruction, and many a perplexed mortal guided in the right way. It encouraged useful institutions and promoted the progress of useful discoveries. Its moral influence was on the side of virtue, and its political influence in favor of the advancement of civil liberty. The Oracle of Dodona was presided over by Jupiter, who uttered prophecies through oak trees, birds, and vases of brass. Many writers have noted the similarities between the rituals of Dodona and those of the Druid priests of Britain and Gaul. The famous oracular dove of Dodona, alighting upon the branches of the sacred oaks, not only discoursed at length in the Greek tongue upon philosophy and religion, but also answered the queries of those who came from distant places to consult it. The talking trees stood together, forming a sacred grove. When the priests desired answers to important questions, after careful and solemn purifications, they retired to the grove. They then accosted the trees, beseeching a reply from the god who dwelt therein. When they had stated their questions, the trees spoke with the voices of human beings, revealing to the priests the desired information. Some assert that there was but one tree which spoke, an oak or a beech standing in the very heart of the ancient grove. Because Jupiter was believed to inhabit this tree, he was sometimes called Phagonius, or one who lives in a beech tree. Most curious of the oracles of Dodona were the talking vases, or kettles. These were made of brass and so carefully fashioned that when struck they gave off sound for hours. Some writers have described a row of these vases and have declared that if one of them was struck, its vibrations would be communicated to all the others and a terrifying din ensue. Other authors describe a large single vase standing upon a pillar, near which stood another column, supporting the statue of a child holding a whip. At the end of the whip were a number of swinging cords tipped with small metal balls, and the wind, which blew incessantly through the open building, caused the balls to strike against the vase. The number and intensity of the impacts and the reverberations of the vase were all carefully noted, and the priests delivered their oracles accordingly. When the original priests of Dodona, the Selai, mysteriously vanished, the oracle was served for many centuries by 3 priestesses who interpreted the vases and at midnight interrogated the sacred trees. The patrons of the oracles were expected to bring offerings and to make contributions. Another remarkable oracle was the cave of Trophonius, which stood upon the side of a hill with an entrance so small that it seemed impossible for a human being to enter. After the consultant had made his offering at the statue of Trophonius and had donned the sanctified garments, he climbed the hill to the cave, carrying in one hand a cake of honey. Sitting down at the edge of the opening, he lowered his feet into the cavern. Thereupon, his entire body was precipitately drawn into the cave, which was described by those who had entered it as having only the dimensions of a fair-sized oven. When the oracle had completed its revelation, the consultant, usually delirious, was forcibly ejected from the cave, feet foremost. Near the cave of the oracle, 2 fountains bubbled out of the earth within a few feet of each other. Those about to enter the cave drank first from these fountains, the waters of which seemed to possess peculiar occult properties. The first contained the water of forgetfulness, and all who drank thereof forgot their earthly sorrows. From the second fountain flowed the sacred water of mnemosyne, or remembrance, for later it enabled those who partook of it to recall their experiences while in the cave. Though its entrance was marked by 2 brass obelisks, the cave, surrounded by a wall of white stones and concealed in the heart of a grove of sacred trees, did not present an imposing appearance. There is no doubt that those entering it passed through strange experiences, for they were obliged to leave at the adjacent temple a complete account of what they saw and heard while in the oracle. The prophecies were given in the form of dreams and visions, and were accompanied by severe pains in the head. Some never completely recovered from the after effects of their delirium. The confused recital of their experiences was interpreted by the priests according to the question to be answered. While the priests probably used some unknown herb to produce the dreams or visions of the cavern, their skill in interpreting them bordered on the supernatural. Before consulting the oracle, it was necessary to offer a ram to the demon of the cave, and the priest decided by hieromancy whether the time chosen was propitious and the sacrifice was satisfactory.